Welcome into another edition of the Musketeer Report podcast. Today is April 1st, 2025, and Richard Pitino was introduced as the head coach at Xavier. Paul, it was an interesting day at the Cintas Center, a fun day for those that were in attendance, I think, and the ushering in of a new era of Xavier basketball is a big deal. So we're going to talk about that, and I just want to start with, we've got a lot to get to here, a lot of different things that were said today, but give me one takeaway. Don't dive into a bunch of things here. Just give me the one thing that you want to start with as a takeaway, something that stood out to you, whether it was something that was personal to you that you liked or just one general vibe.
I thought everything felt very fresh, Rick. I thought everything felt very fresh. It felt vibrant. It felt renewed. It felt like this was really a turning of the page to a new era of Xavier basketball, where there had been a lot of frustrations over the last couple of seasons, whether it was last year's 16 and 18 record or the injuries or everything else that Xavier's dealt with over the last couple of seasons since the Sweet 16. It felt like now this was a true turning of the page to what is hopefully some more positivity and some more good moments. And you could really sense that just in the room, talking to the donors afterwards, even just the day, right? The sun shining in. I know it sounds dramatic, but just the overall vibe of being in that room and kind of everybody's mood walking away from it, I felt was a pretty palpable sense of renewed positivity around the program.
Yeah, I think that's right. I kind of wrote that in my column about the takeaway from the day was just, it's a new era. I mean, I think Greg Christopher made it a point at the end of his remarks to say families get bigger, they expand, the circle gets bigger. And that's what's happening here today. It was kind of like, yes, we've always done things inside the family here at Xavier. We've kind of always stuck within that next assistant up or stayed within that Sean Miller, Chris Mack, Travis Steele tree of coaches the last 20 plus years. And obviously ever since Greg had been here, but this is a new member of the family. Now we're changing it up. The family's getting bigger. It's growing and it's changing. And I think that was definitely one of the big takeaways from the day. In terms of Richard Pitino and his talking, I thought that whether it was just who he is as a person or whether he really read the room based on things we had said, things that had been talked about amongst Xavier fans, the social media banter over the last week plus since Sean left, there wasn't much coach speak or cliches or relying on sayings or anything like that. I mean, it was kind of like straightforward. It was direct. It was like, here's the deal. Here's how we're going to approach it. The sport is what it is at this point, and we feel like we're in a good spot. And there wasn't much dancing around anything. There wasn't a lot of using mantras or any of that. It was just sort of direct. Here's the plan. Here's what we like to do. Just the way he spoke in general, I thought was very direct, and that part of it was refreshing to me.
Yeah, I thought so as well. I couldn't agree more. I just thought the way that the entire day conducted itself, from being in the formal introduction down to the press conference where he was answering questions that were more granular about the scheduling and what he thought this Xavier job would look like as far as why he took it. All of those things and the answers that he gave, it really made you feel as if he understood, exactly what he's getting himself into here. He knows he had conversations that led him to feel comfortable taking this job. I thought it was very interesting hearing him talk about his dad. Obviously, Rick was not in attendance today. He was in Europe recruiting. I saw somebody ask about that. He was not there today. I couldn't imagine he would be. It feels like that would kind of cast a shadow over his son's day, So I wasn't necessarily surprised about that. But just in general, the way that he, like you said, Rick, he was very straightforward. He was very honest with everything. And he didn't beat around the bush. He made it very clear exactly how he wanted to go about his business.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some of the ways in which he was very direct and what he referenced as we go along here. But just continuing with this theme of general vibes and takeaways, let's talk a little bit about how he carried himself and also any early insights into the message or what type of guy he's going to be around for media members and how he'll work with us. Because I think that's one of the things that people are really interested in when they talk to you, me, Adam. They're like, whoa, you guys have enjoyed pretty good access to the program over the last few years. So what's that going to be like? How much are we going to have to wait to get that type of information, that type of content again? Will they work with you the same way? And I guess the thing I've been telling people is like, well, I can't give you any definitive answer. Like, we just don't know what type of people they are or how they'll respond to that. You are already getting some insight into that over the last 2 days. And then we did today, Shelby and I did, as we talked to him before the press conference a little bit there. So I would say initial thoughts on that from me are that he seems extremely accessible. And he even made a point at one point during his press conferences, he even made a point to bring up the idea that he wants the fans to know him, his family, his players, and the program. And it's something that he doesn't take for granted, especially in this NIL era where you're asking people to chip in, you're asking your donors for money and for resources to support the program. He seemed to be of the mindset of like, yeah, you have to feel like you're a part of this thing to do that then. And that would lead me to believe he's going to be pretty accessible.
Yeah. Last week, right after he got announced and then into the next couple of days, what I tried to do was call as many people as I could, talk to as many people as I could reach, people that had maybe called his games, had worked with him. You heard the interview on the Rebound Rundown with his beat writer from New Mexico. I tried to do as many of those things either on the air or off the air as I could from the Mountain West to just say, or to ask the question, who is Richard Pitino? How is he to deal with as far as a media perspective goes? What kind of a coach is he off the court? What kind of a person is he? And without fail, unanimously, person to person to person that has dealt with him, it's been one glowing remark after another about he's great to deal with. He understands how important the media is. He understands how important accessibility is and understanding the program and having that engagement with the fan base. And I think that came through today.
Yeah, and I think you even saw maybe the sense of humor. We saw a couple of funny remarks. One of them, this was actually before the press conference when some of the media members were talking to him. Someone started to bring up his dad and was like, hey, like, I know you get asked about your dad a lot. And he looked at him and was like, oh yeah, they're all very original questions, and it's like just kind of that sarcastic, dry sense of humor that I really appreciate. There was a moment too during the press conference again, where his dad was brought up. I think someone asked like, what's the biggest thing your dad's shared with you or taught you? And he brought up the idea of like, well, I do have a mom too, but no one ever asked me about her. Just funny remarks like that, where it's like, he seems like he gets it. He's quick-witted. And I like that dry, sarcastic sense of humor that seems like it's going to be fun to deal with in press conferences and when we're talking to him.
One thing to back up just a second that I remembered I wanted to say from a minute ago about how he handled himself in this press conference, and this goes hand in hand with what you were just saying. I really appreciated that he hit all the notes that you would want out of a Xavier coach when you're talking about playing in the Big East, you're talking about NIL, you're talking about the crosstown shootout, but he didn't necessarily drone on about each one of those in a way that made it feel dramatic or performative, right?
Yes.
He acknowledged that the crosstown shootout is a big game and it's a game that fans will care to win, but he didn't make a massive deal about it to the point where you're going, oh man, this is going to get clipped in 6 months or 18 months or whenever it might not go Xavier's way, to where we know that coaches in the past have had that happen. So I just thought from that perspective, and it wasn't just the shootout, that's the biggest example that comes to mind, but I thought there were a lot of examples from the overall, from the introduction and from his press conference afterward, where I thought, man, he really just went down the list, checked a ton of boxes that people care to hear about, but he didn't go on and on and on about it to a point where you're kind of going, oh, okay, what?
We're overanalyzing here. We're picking apart everything he says and reading too much into it and making a bigger deal out of it than each of them are. And when a guy is new and he's coming into a job, it's very easy to say he won the press conference and just praise everything he said initially because he hasn't done anything wrong yet, right? So it's like easy to give him the benefit of the doubt in this situation. But I think you know me well enough to know that I'm not a press conference guy. Like, I like to nitpick and make fun of the things that guys say in press conferences like that. And I thought, to the point of when we were saying he was very direct at the top of this podcast, that answer about the crosstown shootout is exactly what I had in mind when I was saying that, Paul. It was like, it's exactly what you want to hear. Yes, it's important, huge game, all the things. He made a big enough deal about it. He didn't shy away from it. He didn't act like, well, it's just one game or anything like that. but he didn't turn it into some silly soundbite like we're going to gobble their behinds. Like he didn't say anything ridiculous that you're going to regret or it turns into a meme later on. It was just like straightforward. Yeah, that's big game. We take it seriously. We're going to try to win it, but it's going to be really hard. Like that's going to be really hard for us. And we've got to assemble a team first and all of that stuff and just move on from there. He did that with almost every answer, it felt like, where it was like sincere answer, straightforward approach, tell you really what he thinks about it, and then move on from it. There was no bits, there was no performative stuff. And that's what I really appreciated about the whole deal. That's really well said. And I think the crosstown shootout answer specifically, if you go back and watch that is like the exact way to handle that question for all coaches going forward. If you're in one of these two jobs, Cincinnati or Xavier, that's how you should answer it. And also it perfectly encapsulates how he handled pretty much the entire day. In terms of the hiring process, I think this is another thing, and we can kind of go back here a little bit because you and I have not talked together since any of this went down at all. No. So like not even really we've exchanged some conversations obviously off the air, but we haven't really had an extended conversation about any of this. And so we can go back and talk a little bit more about the whole process here if you want, if you have anything to add in terms of details or color. But I did want to bring up some of the quotes that he brought up today, talking about Greg Christopher and the process and how he was kind of the mindset like, hey, there are a lot of jobs here that I had in mind that might be interesting to me. When Xavier came up, and obviously this could be a story that he's telling us, but when Xavier came up, it was one that made me say, wow, and really kind of changed my mindset and my approach. And it also got my dad involved. My dad had been telling me, you need to stay at New Mexico. You need to stay at New Mexico. You're winning there. You're supported well there. And then when it was Xavier, he changed his tune and was like, that's a job you need to go after. What was your takeaway from all of that? I
really think it speaks to the strength of the Big East. And that was a massive point that he made repeatedly all afternoon about what kind of a position the Big East is in going forward with revenue sharing, with NIL, with all of those financial aspects of the job, but also being back East, just geographically being back East, allowing his family, his extended family, to be able to watch Xavier games, as opposed to, he used the example, I don't remember if this was in the press conference or if it was just to you, but going and playing San Diego State and they watch maybe the first 4 or 8 minutes of the game, then you hit that under 12 media timeout and it's time for everybody to go to bed. That's not the case now that you're playing on the Eastern time zone and your entire family can watch the game. I thought it was very funny talking about the Patino family group chat and how Rick would always get all the texts, but Richard was left in the dust because he's playing out on the West Coast. And I think playing in the same conference as his dad is obviously going to draw a ton of national attention. But just look at the headlines that Xavier got. For one, when was the last time that Xavier made headlines like that nationally outside of performances on the court, right?
Even for performances on the court, when have they ever been front page of ESPN?
It's ESPN, Sports Center. How many coaches hirings around the country in this cycle got all of the headlines that Richard Pitino, and you don't do a hire for the headlines, but it certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah, honestly, the biggest newsworthy thing I can think of, the two biggest that I can think of during my tenure would be number one, the brawl.
Yep.
That's the time that they were on the front page of ESPN, which obviously they didn't want to be. And then Sean Miller's hiring is probably the second biggest moment because it's a big name. He was coming back from the FBI stuff. So all of that made it a bigger story for ESPN, or for, in general, the nation. But for ESPN specifically, I think they were definitely trying to not talk about that because they had screwed up that whole situation with Sean. And yeah, in general, it definitely didn't generate the same type of national headlines across the board that Richard Pitino joined his father, Rick Pitino, in the Big East did. So yeah, if you're talking about generating a buzz, there's no question that the addition of Richard Pitino did that in a way that, quite honestly, aside from getting a Hall of Fame type name like his dad or like a Bill Self or some huge name like that, I'm not sure who else would have gotten you that. Even if you, let's say they hired Nate Oates, would be a massive story stealing away from Alabama, a guy who looks like maybe the hottest coach in the sport right now. I don't think it would be looked at as a national story the same way Richard Pitino joining his father, Rick Pitino, in the Big East was looked at.
Twice a year, you're going to have the Patino Bowl, and all of the eyes of college basketball are going to be on either the Cintas Center or Madison Square Garden. And you just think about it in the Big East tournament. Imagine dare to dream for a minute, if you're a Fox executive, what it looks like if Rick Pitino plays Richard Pitino in a Big East tournament title game? What, from a ratings perspective and just from a spectacle standpoint, what that's like, just all of the possibilities now in the conference, and I think Richard obviously acknowledges who his dad is, but now I think is more comfortable in his own skin. He talked about that a lot. And this whole hiring process, we can go back to it. I think, like you said, there's a lot of interesting topics that I'm sure people are tuning into here from the last 10 days, not just on the Richard Pitino side that maybe we can hit on.
Well, let's go back right on that topic right there, because before we forget, I want to go. He brought up something interesting when it was like just Shelby and I and Jason Williams, a couple other people talking to him, that throughout when he was in the process with Greg Christopher and they were sitting down for an interview on Tuesday, I believe it was, he said he had to reassure Greg that he had not accepted the Villanova job at that time, because there were all these rumors that it was out there as like
Rob Reinhart got the whole country.
Well, not just burners though. There were real people reporting that he's the front runner to get the Villanova job. And at the same time, it's being reported that Chris Mack is the favorite for the Xavier job. And so like he mentioned the Villanova thing initially, and I asked, well, what about from the other perspective? Like, were you hearing the Xavier stuff and Chris Mack? And he said, I tried to tune all of that out. All of the outside noise and the media reports I tried to tune out and just focus on the conversations I was having. And it felt like the conversations between me and Greg Christopher were going really well. It felt like we were moving towards each other. But at the same time, I did have to think in the back of my mind, like, Xavier typically hires a Xavier guy. And so he was going through that process on Tuesday thinking like, this feels good to me. I think I'm in a good spot. But until Greg Christopher actually offered him the job, I think it was still in the back of his mind that maybe this thing is going to Chris Mack, because that's just what Xavier does in these situations. And so, I mean, I know everybody wanted to like speed past that and immediately go to the transfer portal and all these other questions that people had. It was like, oh, blew it, crazy day, let's move on. That was, to me, like a monumental moment in the history of Xavier basketball. And it's such an interesting moment based on all the reports. Like, I think people wanted to dismiss it and just kind of be like, oh, that was kind of wrong. Like, let's move on to Richard Pitino now. It's like, no, the interesting part of this is how it all played out and what it means. And the fact that Xavier is turning it over a new leaf and how intentional that seemed like it was. And also now the fact that a lot of people are going to say, hey, this better work out. Like, Greg Christopher, you made a bold decision here, but you also have to stand behind your bold decision. Like, it needs to work now. And that, to me, makes this whole situation extremely interesting for Xavier and Xavier fans.
It's fascinating. I mean, the whole weekend of going back and forth between Chris Mack and then Sean Miller obviously taking the Texas job, and then that news breaking into, okay, is it going to be Chris Mack or is it, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, you and I think, are talking to totally different people throughout that process, right? Like, well, I mean, we don't know, but you and I, based on what we were hearing and sharing some texts, it seemed like we were definitely getting information from different places at different times. So I would just like you to speak, because I talked about it on the message board a little bit. How much stuff was out there on Tuesday afternoon? Like, from real people, how much stuff do you think was out there?
Yeah, I will say, I was not around in the source game, I will say, back when Travis Steele got hired, and then when Sean Miller got hired 3 years ago, it was a different situation because it was pretty clear that it was Sean Miller or bust. And
there was only one name.
There was only one name in that hiring process. And that he had considered South Carolina, but it was pretty clear that Xavier was making that decision to try and get Sean Miller. And if it wasn't Sean Miller, then you were going to have to, figure things out. But this go around, I've got my feet under me a little more now that I've been out of school for a little bit and established myself more in this career path. And through some of the connections I've built up over the last few years, this hiring process, for one, Sean taking the Texas job, whenever that got reported Sunday afternoon at 2:45. And I mean, I did appreciate everybody reaching out about Adam and I over those 24 hours. We're all good. We're all good on our end. I was reading all the tweets and all the messages on the message board, but patience is a virtue. I didn't want to say anything until everything was official and, we got all that out of the way. So I did want to say that. But like I, to be totally transparent, I was eating a double cheeseburger, no pickle, small fry, and a large high C orange in the, which kind of ironic, large high C orange in the Hyde Park McDonald's parking lot when I refreshed Twitter and saw the news. So I found out with all of you, as far as that goes. I mean,
you found out that Chris Mack was going back to Charleston?
That Sean was leaving to go to Texas.
Gotcha.
From that perspective. And I mean, that's not totally, it's not like he's making a life-changing, career-changing decision. It's not like I'm, expecting a phone call or anything like that.
I disagree with that. I think there should have been a podcast meeting before the decision was made. I think the fact that he did not consult with you and Baum is crazy.
I mean, I still have not spoken to him since all of that. I was, it's just, obviously it's been a crazy week for him and it's been very busy, but so I found out that with all of you listening to this, and then Monday afternoon into Tuesday, I really started to hear some rumblings. And I mean, I did the rebound rundown. I didn't even mention Richard Pitino's name in my list of, I may have gone back and re-recorded it because I had been hearing Patino to Nova so much behind the scenes. Not that it was done, but I kept hearing it so much that I felt like maybe it was trending in that direction. So I had recorded a segment about Patino and then cut it out because I was like, now if it's Max probably the leader in the clubhouse. Then Alan Huss is a name that I've heard kicked around. Then there were a couple of others. On Tuesday, I'm talking like Tuesday afternoon though. When it was coming down the pipe, Drew Valentine was a name that was very much a name that I had heard from multiple people. And then we got to Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday night, and then later into Tuesday night was when I started to kind of get a sense that Patino was a very serious candidate. And then all of a sudden, 9:18, Chris Mack puts out that tweet. And I just thought to myself, oh man, it's got to be Patino, because that's all I've been hearing now for the last hour or two is Patino. Here's Chris Mack saying he's going back to Charleston. But this was this was going back to what you were saying about a lot of news coming from everywhere. When we were talking about things, it was, wait a second, how do you know this, or what do you know, or how do you know what's happening here? And to me, it just became, okay, there's a lot of unconfirmed reports all over the place. To me, it was just, all right, I guess I'm just sitting back and waiting and seeing what happens. And I didn't expect anything till Wednesday morning. And then all of a sudden it broke on Tuesday night.
It's interesting though, because there's always like people saying stuff, but for the most part, you can throw 95% of that out. Like for the most part, the stuff you hear like that is nonsense. There's like, a small group of people that are really sharing real information these times. And for the most part, there's not that much. Like you're on the phone constantly, but from those people that have real information that you feel is verifiable and you can talk to, it's like, I mean, you're getting solid stuff and there's not that many updates, right? That's why people are constantly asking for updates on things. Like, well, I mean, it is what it is. Like we talked about it, I posted about it, and there's probably not going to be another update until like late tonight or tomorrow or what have you. And people want like, what's the next update? This one was different in the sense that talking to those people, they kept hearing different things. And they didn't seem to feel like they were certain of what was going on. And that made it different in a way that, I mean, I guess this is my third coaching change now. I did Steele, Miller in this one. This was definitely different, completely different from the first two in that way. And so I don't know exactly where we're going with that other than just to kind of tell people behind the scenes, it was pretty crazy Tuesday night, more crazy than any other situation that I've covered in Xavier over the last 16 years.
And to your point, talking to people, national guys and trying to reach out and see what people had heard and just trying to, from my perspective here, is this going to be Chris Mack? And some people that I felt pretty good that it was going to be Chris Mack. So I had sat there and thought, all right, well, I guess unless something happens here, it's probably going to be Chris back here. And then all of a sudden, I honestly, I'm not much of an NBA guy, hand up. So the Luka Doncic thing didn't really shake me to my core the same way that I refreshed Twitter and saw Chris Mack's tweet and had to like go to his profile. I legit waited probably a minute or two to quote tweet that because I thought maybe he was hacked or I thought that it was a burner account. I had to go back and forth, make sure it was real before I
is that a 0 where it says coach or something? Like what's going on with that name?
Yeah. Coach Chris Mack and the I is, like an L or, whatever that I was like, is this a real thing or not? And obviously it was. And then from that point, those 35 minutes until Rothstein broke the news that it was Richard Pitino, I mean, that was a whirlwind. And I think both of us at that point just assumed it would be Patino because that was the only name at that point that anybody was talking about. And obviously that's what it was.
Yeah, I mean, well, I felt strongly that it was Patino at that point, but I wouldn't say it was though. I mean, like, man, I heard stuff from like 4 p.m. on Tuesday, and usually when you're that close to, I mean, think about what we now know. Greg Christopher was in New Mexico with Richard Pitino at that point, and people were people who feel like they would know something were saying Chris Mack is getting off a private jet at Lunken right now and going to Jeff Ruby's. So it's like, I mean, there was just a lot of information out there at that.
The Chris Mack it's almost borderline like. I'm like halfway not sure if Chris ever really was here and then just Greg was in New Mexico. I mean, I know that's not, I'm just joking around, but like there were people that I heard saying that Chris was here that I was like, okay, he must be here, but I hadn't seen him, hadn't talked to him obviously. So I didn't know, but
there's only one other time that's happened to me. Only one other time did like people that I trust said someone was here and they weren't here. And that was right before Sean got hired. People had said that Sean was in the Cintas Center offices the day Travis got fired. I don't know if you remember that, but there were rumors that got out, and I had actually put it on the board that I had heard Sean Miller was around the Cintas Center. And I panned up, like I 100% said I had heard it because I heard it from people that I 100% trusted, and he was not there. At least that everyone tells me now he was not there. I still believe them on that. Maybe it was all a ruse. Who knows? But anyways, interesting 48 hours there during the coaching search. It was a quick process by Greg Christopher. And the one thing that I will just give him so much credit for, you can not like the hire. You can question whether or not this is going to work out for Xavier. And I think all that's valid. You can question, is Chris Mack or one of the other candidates better for the job? And I don't really want to have much of an argument about it because I think it's open to interpretation, and we'll see what happens with Richard Pitino. But I have a lot of respect for someone who makes like their own decision here. And I feel like that's what Greg Christopher was doing. I think there were definitely big donors who wanted Chris Mack, and I feel like a lot of the momentum was for Chris Mack. I feel like it would have been an easy, hooray, good job if you hire Chris Mack from all the people in town here who liked him, media people like him, and the donors that liked him. And Greg Christopher decided to go a new, bold direction. And I respect that, if nothing else. I don't know how it'll work out. I'm not saying it was the best hire. I have no idea in terms of how that goes. But I think it was impressive from that standpoint of just saying, this is what I want to do and this is what I think is best. And it may not be the easiest. It may not make everyone the happiest right off the bat. We may have to convince some people, but this is where I'm standing on this decision.
And this is what I've said all day today. When we were talking after the press conference, and I had some people come up and ask me about the hire and what I thought of it, and I kept saying the same thing, that at the end of the day, Richard Pitino has to win games, right? I mean, it's going to speak for itself. He said that. At the end of the day, all that matters is that you win games. It's how recruits want to play for you. It's how fans want to embrace you. You have to win games. But outside of winning games, what you can do to win people over in the press conference and in your initial impressions is conducting yourself the way Richard Pitino has, and taking a step back from that, the way Greg Christopher very clearly went out and got his guy, right? Went out, had a decision, and I respect the hell out of that.
Yeah. That
he went out and knew that he was about to make a decision that would shake Xavier basketball to its core. And, one thing that I've thought a lot about in the last week is that Xavier has had a ton of success in the last 25, 30, 40 years, right? NCAA tournaments, Sweet 16s, Elite 8s. They have a major conference regular season championship. They've played in multiple Big East tournament title games. There is a lot of success that Xavier has enjoyed over the last 40 years as a Division I basketball program. But one thing they haven't done is make it to the Final Four. And at the end of the day, maybe something wasn't working to not get to the Final Four. And maybe bringing in some new blood, some new life, something different is what it could take to get to the Final Four, to set the set the program up to get to a point where you're playing in the third weekend of the NCAA tournament. And Patino has taken New Mexico to back-to-back NCAA tournaments, and it's not a knock against Chris Mack, who took the program to heights it had never reached before, because I think Chris Mack is a fantastic basketball coach. He'll always, have a special place in my life, given the memories that I had while I was a student at Xavier. And, I very much enjoy watching Chris even coach down at Charleston. I watched a lot of Charleston games this year. Having a new coach that is not part of the Xavier family and just see things around Cintas that need to change, see things around the program, things that just need to be different to try and reach the heights that Xavier basketball wants to get to, I think is very important. And like I said, I really respect that they put their flag in the sand and they decided to make this decision.
Yeah. And the Final Four thing is always aspirational. I know everyone talks about that, but let's face it, with Xavier basketball right now and the way the landscape's changing and the current tenor of the fan base, I think a lot of people just want to see Xavier get back to consistent NCAA tournaments and a second weekend type of program. For a while, it felt like Xavier was going to get to the tournament and win a couple of games. They were going to be in the second weekend more often than not. That was almost the expectation of the program. And now, that feels like it's really difficult to do. And I think people are worried, is the program ever going to be back there with NIL and all that? And that's why, to your point, maybe a fresh set of eyes, a fresh way of doing things isn't the worst thing in the world for everybody. And that has nothing to do with Chris Mack not being good enough to do that, because like you said, I would take Chris Mack as Xavier's best coach of all time. I've written as much in prior years, right when he was leaving Xavier. And he basically gave me my career. So I definitely thought he would have been a good hire had they gone that route, but I really expect the fact that they didn't as well. We could probably move on here and talk about some other things here, because that's enough about the Chris Mack and Richard Pitino situation. But I thought it was important to kind of talk about how all that went down, because we revisited a little bit with him today. And it was interesting to hear from his side that he was kind of thinking the same thing we all were, of what Xavier normally does is go with the previous coach. So Chris Mack could be their guy still. What about I guess one of the other things that was mentioned, we talked about this at the top a little bit, but I don't know if you gave me your thoughts on it, was Rick Pitino, the father, telling him that, Xavier is, one, a job he should consider. Two, it reminds him of Providence, where Richard went to school. So it's a fit from that perspective. It was just interesting. And I think a lot of Xavier fans are going to like to hear that Rick Pitino was definitely behind this decision and pushing him in this direction.
He signed off on it. Yeah, for sure. And that's why I tweeted that clip out about, Richard talking about, his dad and how much his dad means to him, but also the fact that he was very much a proponent of him getting this job, which, as we know, he's been asked about it a million times. Are you living in the shadow of your dad and all of that? And I mentioned that earlier in the show, but at the same time, I did wonder, it was one of the first questions I had. What's this going to be like being in the same conference and knowing that your dad wants to be and kind of is the alpha in this conference, right there with Dan Hurley and the rest, that, you're right there as one of the greatest college basketball coaches in the history of the sport. And now you're in the same conference as him. I think this is a great challenge for Richard. I think he's going to really lean into it. He's going to embrace it. And to have Rick not only say, yeah, okay, fine, take it, but to advocate for it, I think it's significant.
It's interesting because if you go back through the different interviews that he's done, go back to Minnesota, through his time at New Mexico, and now even today talking with us, something that he always makes it a point to do, and I don't think this is any disrespect to his father or anything like that. I think he has a tremendous respect for his dad, but everyone always brings that up and wants to get your father's influence on you as a coach. And pretty much everyone I talked to told me that he goes out of his way to make sure you realize that he is not his father. And I don't think he does that in a bad way, that he thinks poorly about his dad, but he's a different guy. And something that he always does, and he did today, was he brings up and talks very enthusiastically about the influence that Billy Donovan had on him. And how Billy Donovan, when he went to work for Billy Donovan after working for his dad, showed him that, everyone thinks Billy Donovan is a Rick Pitino clone. they think Billy Donovan is Rick Pitino Jr., but Billy Donovan couldn't be more opposite than my dad. He handles everyone and everything totally different from the way my dad does it. So while people think he's as good as my dad and he's a clone of my dad and all these things, he is totally his own guy and is doing things his own way and is comfortable in his own skin. And I think he makes it a point to bring that up all the time because in a lot of ways, I think he views himself as similar to Billy Donovan. Yes, everyone always talks about me being like a disciple of my dad's and I'm getting everything from my dad, but I've put my own stamp on this. I'm doing things my own way. And if anything, I'm more of a disciple of Billy Donovan. Like all of my stuff comes from Billy Donovan, my time working with him. I think he really has a lot of respect for Billy Donovan, and that always comes out when he does these interviews.
And Richard's at least one, if not his only experience inside the Cintas Center was under Billy Donovan. It was back in December of 2010. It was on New Year's Eve of 2010. Florida beat Xavier 71-67. Richard was on that staff under Billy Donovan at that time. And that was at least the one time I know that Richard has been to the Cintas Center. But yeah, that's the one thing that sticks out. 14-year-old Paul was in town for that game from Northern Virginia. So at least in my mind, that game sticks out, but it was a fun game. And that was back in the year that Xavier was a 6th seed, lost to Marquette in the first round of the tournament.
To Holloway, Kenny Freeze days, right?
Yeah, that was to Holloway, Mark Lyons, Jamal McClain, Kenny Freeze, Dante was on that team, Jeff Robinson, and Andrew Taylor.
And there you go. Well, you mentioned Dante, so really quickly, He did talk about Dante, and I thought it's exactly what you'd expect to hear someone say when they're making a hire like that, but it's also nice for Dante to hear. I'm sure everyone is excited that Dante is coming back, and Richard started off his answer about that by saying, the fact that Dante played at Xavier and is coached at Xavier means nothing to me. That's not why I'm hiring him. I'm hiring him because he's a terrific basketball coach. Now, obviously, those other things are important and it's great for us. We like that he has that, but I would only want to hire him if he was good enough to help us win. That's the most important thing. All of those types of things. And again, you would expect to hear that if you're in that situation, making that type of decision. But I'm sure for a guy like Dante Jackson who's sitting there in the press conference, it's nice to hear. And by the way, I think it's earned and it's warranted. I think Dante Jackson, maybe more so than any assistant coach I've seen during my time doing this, came into Xavier and was maybe in a spot where, like, no offense to him, I'll just go ahead and say this. I don't know that he deserved the job at that time. Like, he had bounced around. He hadn't done a lot. He was basically getting hired because Xavier had spent a lot of money on bringing in a couple of expensive assistant coaches at the time. And he was going to be probably a cheaper option because he was very inexperienced. And he obviously had the Xavier background and the Xavier ties. So I think that's more than anything why he got the job at the time that he maybe wasn't quite ready for. And since that time, to me, he was maybe their most impressive recruiter on the previous staff. And he's continued to develop just as a voice at practice and how he develops players and how he can be a guards coach, a big man's coach, your defensive coach. Like, Dante Jackson can fill almost any role on your staff as an assistant coach at this point. And I think you would not only feel that he can do it, but you would feel confident that he's good at that role.
And if you're Dante, you think about assistant coaches that have to bounce around to different staffs to try and get experience to then build the ladder, right? To then to climb the ladder, to build your experience, to get to a point where you can at some point be a head coach. Well, all of a sudden, he's been at Xavier now 7 years, and he's worked under 3 different coaching staffs. You don't get that in too many places where you're hired, then you're retained, and then you're retained again to the point where you don't have to move all around the country. You're here, you're familiar with the area, your family's here, and you can still gain experience from 3 very different coaching staffs as you try to build up your coaching acumen as well.
Perfect segue, because not only is he getting experience with different coaching staffs, but the previous 2 staffs did things fairly similarly from a basketball standpoint, right? I mean, you had a totally new offense with Sean playing that up-tempo style, but a lot of things were very similar. With Richard Pitino, this is now a totally different way of doing things, a totally different defensive system that you're having to learn how to teach. I mean, just the comfortability he's getting with different styles of basketball, different teaching methods, different ways of speaking to your team. All of those things are valuable as a coach that's up and coming and trying to make your way to the head role one day. And yeah, I mean, that's a great point. So that's the other thing I wanted to bring up is the change in philosophy and styles of play for me, and I think I've been pretty clear about this, I cannot wait to see something other than the pack line defense. That's not because the pack line defense is bad or it didn't work, but it's just like we've seen the same thing, the same issues crop up. I've had to explain why it keeps happening for 16 different years. And, how many different teams, different personnel, different conferences that you're competing against, and yet the same things seem like they're always happening against this defense, even as they make changes and try to modernize the pack line defense. It's still continued to happen. I'm just excited to talk about new issues. Like there are going to be trade-offs with this new style of playing, which is going to be up-tempo, trying to force turnovers, trying to block shots, trying to get out and turn defensive turnovers into transition opportunities on offense. All of that stuff is going to be a big part of what they do. And there's obviously going to be issues that occur because you're doing that and you're giving up dunks or whatever on your weak side rotations, but it's just going to be fun to talk about new problems.
Watching a different style of basketball, especially defensively, is going to be jarring for a lot of people, especially people I know that maybe only have time to watch Xavier games. You're not watching a ton of St. John's. You're not watching a ton of other college basketball games that tend to play this style where you're emphasizing ball pressure to the point that Coach Patino will, and you're emphasizing getting steals, getting out in transition. His teams aren't the best shooting teams, but they can really score in transition and they create a ton of turnovers.
Yeah. And, the words he kept using were disruption, uncomfortable. Those are, it seems like if there were buzz terms or there were mantras that he was going to rely on, it's going to have something to do with disruption and making other teams uncomfortable, because each time that he talked about his defense today, those were the words that kept coming up. And it's like, the way they defend ball screens is going to change, but it's going to be a lot of trapping, a lot of hard hedging, a lot of just making teams play in a way that forces them to do something different from what they normally do. And it's a little bit of a special scout when you play Xavier's defense. I think ultimately that's what they're trying to implement. And if you're looking for examples, look at his father's style, look at Marquette's style right now. Those are the two teams in the conference that probably did that type of defense best this year. And we talked about it so many times. Those were the types of defenses that gave Xavier so many issues on the offensive end this year because of the type of team that Xavier was.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just wrapping it up here with offensively, we didn't hear a lot about his style, I don't think, on offense, but it's pretty clear that part of it is going to be similar to what we saw from Sean Miller. He wants to play fast. He mentioned that him and Sean talked a lot about how they were trying to change their philosophies and modernize their systems. As Sean was going from Arizona to Xavier and he was going from Minnesota to New Mexico around the same timeline there. He was talking about they were both taking it from watching Gonzaga and trying to do what they were doing with making you feel their pace on the offensive end and having to adjust to their pace. It really fits what he does defensively, I think, more so than maybe marrying that up-tempo style of play on offense with the pack line on defense.
Yeah, I think from how much him and Sean have talked over the years about offensive styles, you're right. It'll mirror what you saw under Sean Miller pretty closely. But again, the shooting numbers haven't necessarily been there historically, at least in the last few seasons, to the level of Sean Miller's offensive outputs. But just stylistically, that's more of what you're going to see.
Yeah, they do not shoot a lot of threes. He did mention in today's press conference he likes guys who shoot well, and he has had some shooters on his teams, but just stylistically, it's more about getting to the rim, drawing fouls, getting to your spot. It's more of like I don't want to say necessarily NBA offense, but it is more, I do feel like he emphasizes more getting his best players into the spots where they're most comfortable on offense and letting them go to work. It's not necessarily isolation, but it's just sort of quick actions to get them into where they go to work and then let them make plays for their teammates. Now, obviously, when you have a Donovan Den, a Jamal Mashburn, a Jalen House, like the different guards he's had in the last few years at New Mexico, even a JT Toppin as a freshman at the forward position, you've had some nice weapons there that he's been able to find at New Mexico that has made that easier. But that seems to be a lot of what they did. I talked to some of the coaches that he played against the last few years there in the Mountain West, and they said, especially with Donovan Den, it was just lots of spread ball screen, then let him go to work and make plays, and they're going to try to run with a lot of tempo in the offensive end. So that was pretty much all I had on style. I don't know what else, Paul. I mean, wrapping up kind of thoughts, he mentioned that he feels familiar with this area because he spent so much time in Louisville and Lexington as a kid with his dad's jobs, that this area almost feels like home for him already. Because I asked him, I say, where would you consider home? He's like, I'm almost like an Army brat. Like I moved around so much that the Boston area, he spent a lot of time in. He went to Providence. So maybe there, but he said aside from that, it'd probably be like in Louisville, in the Kentucky area.
Yeah, Louisville, Kentucky, or Louisville, Kentucky. That would be Lexington.
Yep.
Louisville, Lexington, and here in Cincinnati, that triangle. I think he feels very comfortable being around here. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other thoughts that you wanted to get to about today? Something that happened? What can the people expect from you, if you're allowed to talk about where you guys are at in the whole content making journey?
Yeah, I mean, look, just to be completely transparent with everybody, I've been doing the Rebound Rundown, which thank you to everybody who has been watching that and been listening to that, who has subscribed to that over the last couple of weeks. I think I've tried to put out a pretty good effort for that product over the last month and a half or so, and that's really grown. So thank you to everybody who's done that. But as far as new content, again, when he came to Xavier, this would have been yesterday, so Monday, when he came over to Xavier to see the Cintas Center, to tour it with his family, and we had the cameras and we were filming everything, taking pictures of them getting their first look at the Cintas Center as a family. That was the first time that I had talked to him. And so it's just about building that relationship and starting from the ground up there. The coaching staff, everybody else just being comfortable, being around, being visible, and hopefully they are as open to doing content with us as we are to hopefully doing as much content with them as possible, because we obviously know how much everybody loved what we did with Sean over the last couple of years. We're appreciative of everybody that watched and invested their time into listening to that. And I think it was a great way for people to engage with the program, to see sides of not just players, or not just, the head coach, but assistant coaches, players, managers, the people around the program, former players, things like that, I think it's important to maintain as much of that type of content as possible. So we'll see where that goes over the next few weeks. I would assume that there's a lull here as, the coaches assemble a team. So I wouldn't expect anything here over the next, month or so, I would say, while they actually put a team together on the floor. But after things get settled, the dust kind of clears, I would say that we're very excited about things that could be possible down the line.
Yeah, and you mentioned assembling the team. We didn't really talk much about that. He did talk about, the fact that they're going to basically do whatever they can. It's going to be very hard. He said it's very unlikely they'll have any freshmen this year unless something late just happens to fall their way. Obviously it's been brought up, Jalen Petty is a guy that they had already committed at New Mexico. So I think that might be a guy that he wasn't including in that. I think he was maybe talking about new freshman recruits probably. So Jalen Petty is still a guy that I would keep on the radar for them. But aside from that, it's going to be mostly transfer portal guys. But then going forward, I think you're going to be looking at a mix of transfer portal freshmen that they want to develop. He's had great success doing that at New Mexico. And he said, look, part of the deal is telling these kids, we'll develop you so you can go make more money. We're okay with that. We want you to increase your value while you're here. That's what we're good at. And I don't think that's just a pitch for New Mexico. I think that's a pitch at every level now, because it is year to year, and guys understand that to maximize their value, they have to jump back into the transfer portal and do the free agency. Nobody likes that, but the quicker you acknowledge it to some level as a program and use it as a selling point, I think it plays to your advantage. And I think that's some of what he's doing right now. I don't think we're going to get into any individuals. They did have their first commitment from a transfer portal as we were on here podcasting. So we'll talk about all of that on the message board. And they've got at least 3 other guys coming in to visit over the next 24 hours or have already visited. So we'll continue to talk about them on the message board as well. Paul, any final thoughts? Are you good?
I would just say that, from a scheduling perspective and from a roster perspective, I thought it was very refreshing to hear him talk about, we'll see what the schedule actually develops into. There were obviously contracts that were established prior to him getting there. The home and home with Iowa was something that was announced. They'll go to Charleston. They'll have the crosstown shootout at home. I'll be interested to see if they maybe try to get one more high major game at home. next season, or maybe they play like a neutral game, try to do one of those kinds of things, like an NIL type game. Maybe they play it at Heritage or something like that. I don't know. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas there that I know people have brought up before. So I think all of that is on the table, but I asked him about that, and he said he would like to schedule in an aggressive way next year. And to then go get guys that he feels like can compete. And also, when he was asked about expectations for next year, he made it very clear that he wants to build, right? And that you can turn around a good product. There's no reason to completely shatter your expectations for year one. They need to be measured.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to understand that you're trying to build things for the future, and you're not just trying to turn around a product for one season. You're not just trying to buy a lottery ticket for a Final Four team in one single season and then doing the whole process over again. Ideally, a lot of coaches, I'm sure, would say that in an introductory press conference, that they want to build for the future. But it was the way that he conveyed the message that made you understand what he's trying to do there. So that's all.
I think that was a huge part of his selling point to Greg Christopher, is his vision for the program and this NIL era, how direct it was, how well he understood it, and how well prepared he is to navigate these waters. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. One more thing that I did want to ask you about before we get off here, because it was something talked about a lot today, and that was his comments about the Big East and why he felt that the Big East was in an advantageous spot moving forward in the college athletics landscape. Now, we've talked about this on the message board a lot, that the agreement that the House versus NCAA is they're trying to settle on is later this week, I think, or next week in April.
7th.
Yeah, April 7th. So later this week. If that gets finalized and goes through, then everything changes. And that's when the revenue share agreements go into place and all of that. And at that point, you would have schools will have up to 20.5 million of revenue share money available to disperse among their sports. A few million is going to go to basically funding the scholarships for the non-revenue sports. And then from there, you'll split the money among your revenue sports. For a lot of schools, especially in the SEC Big Ten, the lion's share of that money is going to go to the football program. Now, there will still be NIL deals on top of that, but these new NIL deals will be, in theory, for actual NIL work. Like, you will be doing an ad for BMW.
Eric Queen will be getting his Dairy Queen ad, and it'll be as NIL intended, or at least that's what we've all been told behind the scenes.
Yes, and that will run through a third-party clearinghouse that says, yes, this is a legit deal with fair market value. It can go ahead and go through, but there's not just going to be the pay for play, like a bunch of money sitting in a pot where corporations said, here you go, Xavier, here's $2 million. You use it however you want towards NIL, but it's just all sort of like in a pot and they're paying it out, as opposed to now, if you want to do that, there's a student athlete coming to your business and doing some type of ad for it. And one, that costs all of you time, energy, focus, and money, but also that person is now a spokesperson for you. So you are going to be a little bit more picky and choosy about how you're using your money when they're actually assigning their names to your business. It's not like, well, I just gave the school a bunch of money to disperse as they see fit.
I think one major thread that I have heard woven all through this offseason, I mean, the Final Four is still coming up on Saturday, which is crazy to think about. We're recording this on April 1st, Rick. The Creighton game happened 1 month ago. Crazy right. What's happened in this last month. But my overall point here is what we've heard over these last few weeks. You can clip this, and I can be wrong about this in a big way in 2 years when things don't change. But what we have been told behind the scenes is that NIL, from a Wild West perspective, this hopefully could be the peak of that this offseason, and that things may start to come back to a, water finding its level type thing going forward. Now, I'm not naive enough to sit here and think that the SEC and the Big Ten and a lot of these big programs can't find loopholes and can't find a way to still spend that money legally, and all of those things that will probably inevitably happen. But at least in theory, I think too is something else that you're hearing is more and more athletes that, yes, they enter the portal, but you're starting to hear more and more guys convey to other guys, I went in the portal 3 times and didn't really work out for me. Maybe you should stay in school. Maybe staying in school at the same place and building under one program is better for my long-term future. That's starting to come back around now that we're in year 4 or 5 of the portal.
Yeah, guys are saying that to each other, but the other guy is going, you know what? Let me go get 300,000 and find out for myself. I'll find that one out for myself. It's just not a lesson you're going to learn without getting the money.
And that's what I mean. Like, I'm not going to sit here on April 1st of 2025 and be naive to think that these power players can't find ways around a lot of these problems. But at least in theory, that's what we've been told.
Yeah, well, the other part of it too is like, there is donor fatigue out there. And some of these big corporations are gonna be like, wait a minute, you got revenue share now. And I also donated to the university to help with the revenue share. I'm not giving you another big NIL deal on top of that afterwards. So like, I know all the fans think that it's still going to be the same exact thing, just revenue share on top of it. But there is a difference between the two now. And that is going to change how it operates going forward. It will slow it down somewhat, at least initially, until they find some other loophole or workaround. And then I've heard, another 3 years or so, I think a lot of people believe Congress is going to step in again, and there's going to be some type of like real guardrail, real evolution of this whole thing again. So a lot of schools that I think are in kind of this middle tier are feeling like they need to hang on for another 3 years and things might shift even more in their favor. But I guess for the immediate conversation we're having right now as it relates to Richard Pitino, how much do you buy what he was saying today? Because like Sean Miller just left Xavier, presumably from everything we've heard, because he feels like he needed to get to the SEC to have the resources to compete. Richard Pitino, obviously he's coming from the Mountain West, so Xavier is going to be a step up from where he came from. But he said he specifically wanted to be in the Big East in a basketball-centric conference because he feels like it's going to be advantageous compared to other high majors going forward with this new settlement. How much are you buying of what he was selling today?
Well, just look at Kevin Willard making the move from Maryland to Villanova. I think the Big East, look at the article. Was it Ross Dellinger that wrote that article last week?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. I think the Big East, for all of the flack that the conference may have gotten over the last year or so, I think they are in the long run set up for a good amount of financial success if the rules are applied the way that they're about to be applied on April 7th and everything goes as we think it could go. Then I could very much see why coaches would love the appeal of not having to share with football.
Yeah. I think also the other thing you have to remember about a place like, let's use Texas, for instance, because they're the other school in this conversation right now. With all that talent they had this year, which included a top 5 pick and another first rounder and all the resources they had, that was good enough to get 14th in their conference. Now, you can argue that, hey, they had a bad coach, a better coach will do more with that talent. But like the SEC is freaking hard to win in, man. The Big Ten is going to be the same way for the most part in most years. So even if the resources are slightly better in those conferences overall, I'm not saying the Big East is easy to win in, but again, 14th in the SEC with Texas's talent last year, that's tough to think. I mean, think about how close Xavier and Texas were talent-wise. It felt like Texas had more talent than Xavier did this year. And Xavier was finishing top half of the Big East versus 14th in the SEC. That's something that I would be thinking about as well when you start talking about these jobs and how good they are and all of that. The opportunity to win in your conference is also very important to the job you are taking. And so, as far as the NIL and revenue share and all that, we'll see how it all plays out. I do think there is the possibility that the Big East is in a much better position going forward than it's been the last 2 years. But I also think just from a standpoint of being able to win, you're set up better at Xavier than you are a lot of these Big Ten and SEC jobs.
And that's why you've seen a lot of the national media. I mean, you saw Matt Norlander talk about it. You saw Rob Doster advocating for a lot of these national media guys have been advocating for the Xavier opening in the last 10 days because of what they feel like this job can be, how much the fans care, how much donor support is there. There's a lot of donor support at Xavier. I want to stop that narrative that there's this lack of donor support that got spun from some other narratives maybe from around it, that Xavier is positioned well with the support that they have from a resources perspective. Yeah, it might not be top end of the SEC. Nobody's going to sit here and deny that. But it's not like Xavier's crying poor either.
Yeah. And specifically from the paying players thing, I think Xavier's specifically in a better spot there than some people realize. Like the overall resources, yeah, like you're not going to compete with Texas's overall resources, right? Like I know pretty much NKU's entire staff came from Texas at this point. And trust me, I've heard some stories about what's going on there in Austin. And it's pretty insane when you talk about the facilities and like the people on staff and the food ability, the things they do for food for the athletes and stuff. Yeah, like all that stuff's crazy. I get it. But that's not the same as what they have available to pay players going forward under the new rules. And I think that's going to be a much more interesting conversation when you're trying to build your roster. So we'll see how it all plays out. I just felt like we needed to address that because it was brought up. The 20.5 million number specifically, Richard Pitino made a joke about that during the press conference today, saying that Greg Christopher had assured him that they will have 20.5 million to use. Why did he use that number? Because that's the maximum allowed by the rev share cap under the new agreement if it comes to pass here on the 7th or 8th or whatever you said that was.
Yeah.
That's why he brought up that number. It was a joke. Like you wouldn't be allowed to spend all 20.5 as a basketball program at any school, even if you had it. And Xavier isn't going to have 20.5 million to spend.
My last thing on this point, Rick, is just him using the specific example in his introduction where he said, my goal obviously is always to compete in the NCAA tournament, but my specific goal is to compete for Big East championships because I know that that's going to set me up well from a seeding perspective and for a run in the NCAA tournament. And I thought that was really interesting because it goes to exactly what we were just talking about. Because if you're competing at the Big East level, if you're winning Big East championships, if you're competing for Big East championships at the top half of the conference, if you're not playing on Wednesday night at Madison Square Garden, all of those things together are going to put you in a good position to succeed in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, he said my singular focus is winning Big East championships. And I mean, who can argue it? Now, maybe the sport will change going forward. Maybe we're wrong about the Big East, but who can argue when maybe the Big East hasn't had the depth in recent years? But in terms of championships, like national championships, the Big East has held its own there. So if you're at the top of the Big East, you got a chance to win it all most years, at least over the last 10 plus. So that's probably a good spot to leave it. I know I've said this like 3 times now, but for real this time, do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
No, I don't think so. I'm sure we'll be podcasting a lot over the next couple of weeks, so we'll leave that one there.
Yeah, and again, I know there's a ton going on with transfer portal news. Everyone wants to know about that stuff. It's moving too fast to talk about on a podcast. It would be there would be no shelf life on this. It would be old by tomorrow morning at 11 a.m., I think. So we will just go ahead and say go to the message board, musketeerreport.com, where we'll be talking all about the transfer portal news and Richard Pitino putting together his new roster at Xavier. But for today, the news is the introductory press conference is over and done with, and the new era has begun on Victory Parkway. Thanks, Paul. We'll talk to all of you guys more about this on the premium message board at musketeerreport.com.